It's probably best for me to start out this review talking about Dark Souls and Bloodborne, as Death's Gambit follows in these games' footsteps. Throughout the existence of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, or as the cool kids call it, Soulsborne, a whole new genre has emerged known as Souls-like. The Souls-like genre basically encompasses any difficult action games that feature boss fights. Therefore, a lot of games get compared to Dark Souls, and typically unfairly so. Personally, I am a big Dark Souls fan. I started the series by playing Dark Souls 3 in 2017. I was totally clueless as to how anything worked, and I found myself confused beyond belief. And so, one of my friends, his channel will be linked in the description, helped me through the game and basically fought everything for me. While I really didn't get to experience Dark Souls the way it was meant to be played, I was now hooked on the series and ready to take on the challenge on my own. So I played Bloodborne. And then I played Dark Souls 1. And then I played Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. All of these games left a lasting impression on me, and I still come back and play them to this day. Occasionally I even try to add an extra challenge to the games, like no leveling or broken sword only, to make them more interesting. Unfortunately, I've become somewhat tired of the Souls trilogy. I know most of the ins and outs of these games, and therefore they hold no surprises for me. They are still very special and are some of my favorite games, but I miss the feeling of playing through them for the first time. Now enters the Souls-like genre. All along there were a multitude of titles that were fairly similar to my favorite game series. The first of these games that I tried was Death's Gambit. Death's Gambit is a 2D pixel art game that isn't afraid to show off its inspirations. However, while being alike to Dark Souls is one of its selling points, it's also one of its biggest downfalls. Let's start by taking a look at the story of Death's Gambit. Death's Gambit follows the story of Soren, a man who died in battle but was granted immortality by death if you do his bidding. He sets you out on a journey to a fortress called Caer Siorai, where there is a source of immortality that is preventing people from entering the afterlife. As you would probably expect, Death is not a fan of this and wishes to have this source of immortality destroyed. Throughout the game, you are given flashbacks and visions that cue you into more of the backstory, telling you more about Soren's mother as well as the battle that he went through. You also get some exposition thrown at you from NPC's dialogue. There really is a lot to the story of Death's Gambit. But that's the problem with Death's Gambit, that there's a lot to the story. A bit too much to make sense of. Your goal is certainly clear, but Soren's backstory and the lore of the game isn't pieced together well. The flashbacks can be extremely confusing, and they sometimes destroy the pacing of the game. I would go as far to say that the game would have done better without them. NPC dialogue is oftentimes cryptic and confusing. A lot of information is thrown at the player, and it can be overwhelming. It almost feels as if you've been given this 1,000-piece puzzle, and you are told to finish it in an hour. You'll definitely be able to put some of the pieces together, but there is no way that you will get everything to fit. The concepts and ideas the game touches on with the story are certainly commendable. Unfortunately, what they gave in terms of delivering the story just sort of falls flat. With this all being said though, I don't believe that Death's Gambit is a game you should be playing for the story. Rather, I believe the primary focus of Death's Gambit is on its gameplay. So how did they do in that department? As has been mentioned, this game is a Souls-like. Therefore, a lot of the mechanics you see in Dark Souls are also present in Death's Gambit. You got your dodge roll, you got your block, you got your parry, typical of any Souls-like game. However, you can see clear inspiration from Dark Souls in the game's other mechanics. There are shrines, which are the equivalent of bonfires. There are healing feathers, the equivalent of Estus flasks. They use the same weapon upgrade system as well. They both feature a central hub where you can find NPCs and that you can use to level up. Even the death mechanics are the same, where you lose your shards on death and have to go pick them up again. This game is a two-dimensional pixel art version of Dark Souls. The game even makes a joke about it being exactly like Dark Souls. I mean, come on! Of course, some people might say, hey, isn't the point of a Souls-like to be like Dark Souls? And yeah, it is, but don't just copy someone's homework. Be more unique. But anyway, let me focus on the gameplay more, because I'm getting much too carried away with comparisons. You spend most of your time exploring areas and killing enemies to collect shards so you can upgrade Soren and become more powerful. You collect important items along the way, such as new weapons and armor to help you during your expedition. It's worth mentioning that the weapon variety in this game is subpar. Some weapons feel like they don't fit into the world, such as a gun. I'm out here fighting with a sword, and then they give me a gun? What? But I digress. At the end of areas, you typically fight a boss, and then after beating said boss, you move on to the next area. This is a typical gameplay loop you'll find, and it works to some extent. Exploration is always a great time, collecting loot is exciting, the boss fights will keep you on the edge of your seat. Death's Gambit also adds in weapon abilities that keep combat interesting. It makes it more strategic, making you question when you should use your abilities, and which ones. It's also worth mentioning that this game is difficult, as are most Souls-like games. It will not hold your hand, and it will try to kick you while you're down. It's tough, but doable. So if you like that style of gameplay, this will be right up your alley. Now with all this being said, we come down to the question of whether the gameplay is good. In short, yeah, sort of. However, there is a really important point that I can't stress enough. This gameplay is just a copy and paste of Dark Souls in a 2D environment. And to be brutally honest, 2D tends to be a detriment for exploration and combat aspects of the game. Everything feels fairly linear, and nothing seems well hidden. Also, when it comes to combat, being able to navigate a 3D environment allows for more movement and freedom, which are areas that this game falls a bit short on. There are definitely some good ideas implemented in the gameplay, but unfortunately, it came out feeling like a half-baked version of Dark Souls. In Death's Gambit, there are 14 bosses total. Some of them are mandatory, and some of them are optional. I'm not going to go through and talk about each boss as that would spoil a lot of the game, but I will give a brief overview of the bosses in general. The bosses have very good variety, each having their own special mechanics that you have to learn. Some bosses are these giant hulking monstrosities, while others are more human, creating what feels like more intense one-on-one battles. Also, as you would expect, these bosses are tough. None of them are pushovers. You will die a lot. In my opinion, unfortunately, very little of these fights were memorable. When I was writing the script for this video, I couldn't name a single boss. This isn't to say the fights were bad at all, rather that they were aggressively mediocre. There was one boss that I hate with a burning passion because it's very gimmicky, but beside that one, most of the battles were just meh. I didn't really care about very many of them. Occasionally after a boss fight I would think, oh, that was pretty good. But those occurrences were few and far between. It's worth mentioning that you can do rematches with the bosses that will be more difficult than the regular boss fights. This is a really nice touch to the game, as being able to replay your favorite bosses is a feature most games should have. To sum it up, I would say that if you're tired of the Dark Souls bosses, try Death's Gambit. The bosses aren't too bad, but they also aren't too good. Death's Gambit is able to excel in creating environments and atmospheres that draw you in. Each area is very unique. You got your snowy tundra, you got your castle, you got your graveyard, you got your futuristic robot bunker? Wait, what? Okay, so not all the environments make much sense, but let's ignore that for a second. It's always nice to see some environment variety, and Death's Gambit works hard to deliver just that. One of my problems with Dark Souls 3 is that I feel like I'm always running around castles. I don't notice much variety in the environments. Death's Gambit is willing to give a ton of different feeling locations to explore. But uh-oh, some sick rat bastard decided to take any attempt of making the areas flow and throw it right out the window. Why the hell am I playing a game that has a medieval type vibe to it, and yet there is an area that features robots and machine guns? I've been playing through the entire game with this sword, and now enemies are shooting at me? Imagine Gwyn pulling out a gun on you. You can't, because it's stupid and makes no sense. Why would they make this area? It was so close on nailing the environments, but then one of the developers had to take a trip to Stupid Town and come back with the worst idea ever. Looking at all the areas separate from each other, it's not that bad, but looking at it as part of a whole game, God, is it awful. It destroys any immersion you had in the world. To reiterate, it's not the worst, but it's definitely upsetting. Now on to the art style for a brief moment. This is a game featuring 2D pixel art. And yeah, they knocked it out of the park here. Character models look great, the environments are stunning, bosses look dope. It's all very well done. If pixel art isn't your thing, then this game probably won't appeal. However, most people will be unable to deny the fact that this game looks pretty good. I always love talking about music because oftentimes it's the one way I continue to engage with the game, by listening to its soundtrack. This is one of the few games that I go out of my way to listen to the OST. There's some beautiful songs on there, from the sad acoustic piece of Moonlit Sniper to the intense strings of the song Dark Night. All of the pieces do a great job in fitting the tone of the game. Music is where Death's Gambit excels. Each boss has its own song to go with it, and each piece fits the intensity of the fight perfectly. If there is one portion of the game I had to give praise to, it would be the music. Of course, not every song is a hit. Some boss themes come off as a little clunky, trying to fit the aggressive themes of the fight, but overshooting the intensity of the music. But for me, this can be overlooked, as most of the game's OST is a joy to listen to. So this conclusion might be a bit long-winded as there is still a lot I have to say, but I will try my best to wrap things up nice and quickly. Death's Gambit is decent. I wouldn't consider it bad by any means. I believe the game accomplishes what it set out to do. The art style looks great, the music is really good, the gameplay isn't half bad, the story is there. However, what this comes down to, at least for me, is how it stacks up to other games in the genre. And by that, I mean, how does this game stack up to Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and the rest of the From Software gang of games? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't hold. Not in the slightest. I see no reason to pick up and play Death's Gambit if you are still yet to play any of From's titles. The Dark Souls trilogy offers so much, it would make no sense to try this game before you've tried any of those. I would go as far to say that, even if you have played Dark Souls and Bloodborne, just keep playing those over Death's Gambit. Those games still offer variety in creating different builds that this game lacks. Death's Gambit is just a game that is overshadowed by its contemporaries. It tries really hard to be Dark Souls, and it only succeeds in feeling like a knockoff. If you are tired of the From Software games, definitely give this game a try. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't touch this game. For that reason, I would give Death's Gambit a 5.2 out of 10.